My husband once told me I wasn't classy enough to sit at the head table during his company's most important dinner of the year. He seated me with the junior staff, made jokes about my simple tastes, and introduced me as his beautiful but grounded wife, code for someone who didn't belong in his world of power suits and corporate ambition. What Andrew didn't know was that I owned 14% of the very company he worked for, built under a name he never thought to ask about. The night everything unraveled started like any other, with him taking credit for work he didn't do, and me staying silent in the shadows. But silence, I've learned, can be the loudest statement of all. Some secrets aren't meant to stay buried forever, and mine was about to detonate in front of 200 witnesses. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you are watching from today. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Ballroom cast prismatic light across 500 faces, each one carefully curated for tonight's charity gala. Elena Carter moved through the crowd like a whisper, her simple black dress elegant in its refusal to compete with the sequined excess surrounding her. She checked the silent auction tables one final time, ensuring the scholarship fund displays were positioned perfectly, then stepped back into the shadows as the speeches began. Ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Carter's voice boomed across the sound system, his smile practiced and bright. Langford Holdings is proud to sponsor tonight's event, supporting underprivileged students in their pursuit of higher education. Applause rippled through the room. Elena watched her husband from behind a marble column, noting how naturally he accepted credit for the event she'd spent 6 months organizing. Later, as champagne flowed and conversations fragmented into exclusive clusters, Andrew introduced her to a circle of his colleagues. "Gentlemen, my beautiful wife. She's not into the corporate world, bless her." His tone carried affectionate condescension that drew knowing chuckles. "She keeps the home fires burning while we're out making the deals, right, darling?" Elena smiled softly, lowering her eyes. Across the room, her best friend Naomi Pierce caught her gaze and raised one perfectly sculpted eyebrow. The look between them lasted only a second, but it said everything. I'm keeping score. The evening ended with Andrew drunk on praise and wine. In the car ride home, he critiqued Elena's lack of engagement with his boss's wife. "You could have talked about art, fashion, anything sophisticated. Instead, you just stood there like some wallflower." "I was listening," Elena replied quietly. "That's different from standing." At home, their Beacon Hill townhouse felt cavernous despite its elegant dimensions. Andrew immediately retreated to the study with a whiskey, leaving Elena to slip out of her heels and wander to the kitchen. She prepared a simple pasta carbonara, the kind her grandmother taught her to make, comfort food that required attention and care. When Andrew emerged an hour later, he stared at the modest dinner with unconcealed disappointment. "Pasta? Elena, we have a Sub-Zero full of food and you make this?" He gestured dismissively. "Victor's wife serves canapés at midnight. You serve carbs." Elena set down her fork with deliberate calm. "Class isn't bought, Andrew. It's shown." The silence that followed felt venomous, coiled and ready to strike. Andrew's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, stabbing at his food with aggressive precision. Later that night, alone in the upstairs office she kept for herself, Elena opened her laptop. The screen glowed blue in the darkness as she logged into an encrypted portal under the name Elena Reeves, her maiden name, the identity she'd carefully preserved. Investment portfolios scrolled past, venture capital positions, private equity stakes, real estate holdings across 3 continents. Her finger paused on one particular file, Langford Holdings. Current ownership, 14.2%. She heard Andrew's footsteps on the stairs and quickly closed the laptop, replacing it with a book on Italian gardens. He appeared in the doorway, already in pajamas. "Coming to bed?" "Soon," she said, not looking up. He left without another word, and she waited until his footsteps faded before reopening the screen. The numbers glowed like secrets in the dark. The following Thursday brought the monthly dinner with Andrew's mother. Claudia Carter lived in a sprawling estate in Cambridge, old money that had thinned but never quite disappeared. The dining room smelled of roasted lamb and maternal judgment. "Andrew tells me you're volunteering again. Claudia said, her tone suggesting volunteer work was something done by people with too much time and too little importance. How charitable of you, dear. I enjoy it, Elena replied, cutting her meat with precise movements. Claudia dabbed her lips with a monogrammed napkin. A woman like you should be grateful someone married you above your league. Andrew could have chosen from so many accomplished women. She paused, letting the words sink in like poison into soil. But he chose you. That says something about his character, doesn't it? Andrew said nothing, merely smirked into his wine glass. Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the way humiliation compresses the lungs, but she kept her expression serene. It says everything, Elena agreed quietly, though her meaning differed from Claudia's intention. The dinner dragged on with discussions of country clubs and upcoming galas. Elena contributed little, observing how Andrew animated when discussing his imminent promotion, how his mother fed his ego like kindling to a fire. On the drive home, Andrew was buoyant. Mother's right, you know. I took a risk on you. The least you could do is try to fit in better. Elena stared out the window at the lights of Boston blurring past. I'm not trying to fit in, Andrew. I'm just trying to be myself. Well, maybe yourself isn't enough for this world. The words hung in the air between them, a verdict pronounced and sealed. That weekend, they attended a company lunch at Legal Seafoods. When the young waiter accidentally spilled wine near Andrew's briefcase, her husband erupted. Jesus Christ, how incompetent can you be? Do you have any idea how much this costs? The waiter, barely 20, stammered apologies while frantically dabbing at the already minimal spill. Elena reached out and gently touched the young man's arm. Never mind him, she said quietly, pressing a folded $50 bill into his hand. Everyone has bad days. Both of you. The waiter's eyes filled with grateful tears. Andrew glared at her across the table, but said nothing in front of his colleagues. Later, in the car, he exploded. Don't ever undermine me like that again. That kid needed to learn. He's working his way through college, Elena interrupted. Just like I did. Remember? That was different. You were, he stopped himself, but the sentence completed itself in the silence. You were nothing. That night, past midnight, Elena's phone glowed with Naomi's name. She stepped onto the balcony to answer, the October air sharp against her skin. You sure you want to keep this secret? Naomi's voice carried concern and something else, anticipation. Elena looked out at the city, a constellation of ambitions and broken dreams. Sometimes power works best when unseen, Naomi. Light casts shadows, but shadows can hide entire empires. He's going to find out eventually. I know. Elena's voice was soft but certain. But it needs to be the right moment. The moment when silence becomes deafening. Later, alone in her study, Elena opened her leather journal. Across the top of a fresh page, she wrote in careful script, the Reeves Foundation Scholarship Fund, for those who were told they weren't enough. Below it, she sketched organizational charts and funding structures, a parallel empire built on the ashes of every insult. She paused, pen hovering over paper, then wrote one more line. Class isn't what you wear. It's what you carry. The next morning, over breakfast, Andrew dropped the announcement casually. There's a company retreat next month. Langford's private vineyard in Napa. You'll come, obviously. Of course, Elena said, buttering her toast. But listen, he leaned forward, his tone shifting to instructional. Don't try to talk business with anyone. Just look elegant, laugh at the right times, and let me handle the networking. Can you do that? Elena met his eyes, her expression unreadable. I can do that. Good. He stood, kissing the top of her head like she was a child who'd finally learned a simple lesson. This retreat is important for my promotion. Langford's going to announce the big merger. I need you to be perfect. After he left, Elena sat alone in the morning light streaming through the windows. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Naomi. It's time. I'll need the files ready by the end of the month. The response came instantly. Already done. Let's show them what quiet looks like when it roars. Elena smiled, an expression that didn't quite reach her eyes, and returned to her breakfast. Outside, Autumn leaves fell like secrets waiting to be told. The private jet touched down in Napa Valley under a sky so blue it seemed artificial. Elena descended the stairs in her simple emerald dress, its silk catching the California light. Around them, executives and their wives emerged from luxury vehicles, designer luggage glinting, voices pitched at that particular frequency of enforced leisure. The vineyard estate sprawled across 200 acres, its main house a masterpiece of modern architecture and old money taste. Andrew immediately disappeared into a cluster of colleagues, leaving Elena to wander the grounds alone. She didn't mind. Solitude had become her natural state. "Mrs. Carter?" A young woman in staff uniform approached with a welcome cocktail. "Your suite is ready whenever you'd like to freshen up." "Thank you," Elena said warmly. "What's your name?" The woman blinked, surprised to be asked. "Sarah." "Thank you, Sarah. The property is beautiful." As Sarah walked away, Elena noticed her glance back with an expression of pleased surprise. Small kindnesses, Elena had learned, were their own form of power. They accumulated invisibly like interest. The evening's cocktail hour assembled on the terrace overlooking endless rows of vines. Elena accepted a glass of Chardonnay and positioned herself near a pillar, observing the social choreography. Andrew held court with 3 other executives, his laughter too loud, his gestures too broad. One of them, a man named Richard whom Elena remembered from previous events, noticed her and called out, "Andrew, you're brave bringing someone so grounded to the circus." Andrew laughed, the sound carrying across the terrace. "She's learning. Aren't you, darling?" Elena smiled, raising her glass in acknowledgement. From across the terrace, Naomi appeared, officially attending as an external financial consultant. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi's expression said she'd caught every word, filed it away in that formidable memory. Later, during dinner, a woman in head-to-toe Chanel leaned toward Elena with practiced interest. "So, what do you do, dear?" "I dabble in investments," Elena replied modestly. The woman's eyes flickered with barely concealed amusement. "How nice. My husband says women have such good intuition for those little stock picks." She said little the way one might say cute. "Sometimes intuition is just pattern recognition we can't quite articulate," Elena responded gently. The woman's smile tightened. "Of course, dear." Across the table, Andrew was deep in conversation about his upcoming promotion. "Langford trusts me like family," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "The merger announcement is just a formality at this point. I've been instrumental in securing the investment." Elena's expression remained unchanged, though she knew the board, which included her carefully maintained alias, had yet to make any final decisions. She took a small sip of water and said nothing. That night, in their suite's opulent bedroom, Andrew loosened his tie with satisfaction. "Did you see how Victor responded to my comments about the Asian markets? He's clearly positioning me for VP. Elena responded, removing her earrings. "Though you," he turned to her, his expression shifting. "You talk like a professor again during cocktails. This crowd doesn't need dissertations on pattern recognition or whatever that was. Act softer, more feminine." Elena set down her jewelry with careful precision. "I'm not acting anymore, Andrew." The words landed between them like dropped crystal. Andrew stared at her, unsettled by something in her tone he couldn't quite identify. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm tired of pretending simple equals stupid." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You're being dramatic. Get some sleep." The next morning, Naomi cornered Elena during the continental breakfast. They filled plates with fruit and pastries, moving to a quiet corner of the veranda. "Langford's under pressure," Naomi said quietly. "The merger vote happens tonight. Your husband's name is on the risk assessment list." Elena's hand paused over a strawberry. Risk for what? Overconfidence. Loose lips. Taking credit for things he didn't do. Naomi's voice was clinical. "The board's noticed. And the investment approval? Signed this morning. They'll announce the lead investor tonight at the dinner." Naomi met Elena's eyes. "Last chance to back out of this." Elena selected the strawberry, bit into it thoughtfully. "Let the night play out." At noon, Victor Langford himself arrived by helicopter, his entrance dramatic and calculated. He was 50-something, silver-haired, with the kind of confidence that comes from never having to prove it. He greeted the assembled executives warmly, working the room with practiced charm. When Andrew introduced Elena, something flickered in Langford's eyes. "Mrs. Carter." He took her hand, held it a moment too long. "Have we met before?" Elena smiled faintly. "Not officially." His brows furrowed slightly. "Strange. You seem familiar." "I have one of those faces," she replied smoothly. Later, as the afternoon wine tasting began, Langford found himself near Elena again. The coincidence wasn't accidental. Elena had positioned herself precisely where she knew he'd end up, using the same spatial awareness that made her excellent at chess. "You know," he said quietly, swirling his Cabernet, "I've learned to trust my instincts about people. And my instincts say you're not what you seem." Elena met his eyes steadily. "Most people aren't, Mr. Langford. We're all performing to some degree. But you're not performing now." "No," she agreed. "I'm waiting." "For what?" "For the right moment to stop." He studied her with new interest, opened his mouth to ask more, but Andrew appeared, slightly drunk and oblivious. "Mr. Langford, have you tried the 2019? It's extraordinary." He grabbed Elena's elbow possessively. "Come on, honey. Let's not monopolize the boss's time." Langford's expression cooled noticeably at Andrew's tone. "Actually, Carter, your wife and I were having quite an interesting conversation." "Oh, Elena doesn't really," Andrew started. "Mind your tone," Langford interrupted, his voice quiet but sharp. "Mrs. Carter strikes me as exactly the kind of person worth listening to." Andrew's face reddened. He muttered something about checking the dinner seating and retreated. Langford turned back to Elena, but the moment had passed. She excused herself with practiced grace. As afternoon shifted toward evening, whispers circulated about the merger. Naomi had carefully leaked information, controlled, strategic, designed to build anticipation. "Anonymous female investor," someone said near the pool. Supposedly her vote was the deciding factor. The rumor spread like wildfire through the exclusive gathering. Female investors in private equity were rare enough to generate interest. Anonymous ones were practically mythical. At 6 o'clock, Elena stood in front of the suite's mirror, adjusting the emerald dress one final time. It was simple, elegant, requiring no jewelry to complete it. Behind her, Andrew was preening in his Tom Ford suit, checking his reflection from multiple angles. "Tonight changes everything," he said, more to himself than to her. "After Langford announces the merger success, I'll be untouchable." Elena said nothing, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. "Try to look proud, sweetheart," Andrew added as they headed toward the door. "You'll never see this level of success again. Might as well enjoy watching from the sidelines." She paused at the threshold, hand on the doorframe. "You're right, Andrew. Tonight changes everything." He was too intoxicated by anticipation to notice the quiet steel in her voice. The grand dining hall had been transformed into something from a movie. Long tables draped in ivory cloth, thousands of candles creating pools of golden light, flowers arranged with architectural precision. 200 guests settled into their seats as a string quartet played Vivaldi. Elena found herself seated at the far end of the table, surrounded by junior executives and their wives. Andrew had deliberately arranged the seating, making a joke of it during cocktails. "She's more comfortable there," he'd said, drawing knowing laughter. "Let's save the power positions for people who understand the stakes." From her distant seat, Elena could see the head table where Andrew sat near Langford, his posture radiating assumed importance. Naomi, seated mid-table as an external consultant, caught Elena's eye and raised her wine glass infinitesimally. The gesture said, "Almost time." Elena gazed at the candles marching down the center of the table, watching her reflection fragment and multiply in their flames. She whispered so quietly no one else could hear, "You wanted class, Andrew. Tonight you'll get it." As waiters delivered the first course, Langford stood, tapping his glass for attention. The conversations died away like waves retreating from shore. In the sudden silence, Elena could hear her own heartbeat, steady and strong. "Ladies and gentlemen," Langford began, his voice carrying the weight of announcement, "tonight we celebrate not just a successful merger, but the partnership that made it possible." Andrew straightened in his seat, hands already positioned to rise in acknowledgement. "The investment community," Langford continued, "often operates in shadows, with silent partners whose wisdom shapes entire industries." He paused, letting anticipation build. "Tonight, we honor one such partner, a visionary investor whose insight literally saved this company." Murmurs rippled through the room. Andrew's smile grew wider. Elena remained perfectly still. "This individual," Langford said, his voice taking on a note of genuine respect, "chose to remain anonymous until now, believing that the work matters more than the recognition." Andrew stood, adjusting his tie, raising one hand in modest acknowledgement. "Thank you, sir. It's an absolute honor to." "Sit down, Carter." The words cracked like a gunshot. Andrew froze, hand still raised, smile beginning to falter. 200 faces turned toward him, then back to Langford. "I wasn't speaking to you." The silence that followed felt archaeological, layers of meaning compressed into seconds. Andrew sank back into his chair, face draining of color. Langford smiled, genuine warmth transforming his expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our lead investor, our newest board member, and one of the sharpest financial minds I've had the privilege to work with." He paused, letting the moment crystallize. "Ms. Elena Reeves." The gasp that swept the room sounded like wind through trees. Heads swiveled, searching for the mystery woman. Elena rose from her distant seat with fluid grace, the emerald dress catching light as she moved. The path to the stage seemed to lengthen and compress simultaneously, every eye tracking her progress. Cameras flashed as Elena reached the stage, each burst of light illuminating Andrew's face at the head table, shock giving way to disbelief, then to something darker. Langford extended his hand, helping her up the steps with old-world courtesy. "Or, as I now understand," he added with a warm smile, "Mrs. Carter." The implications detonated through the room like sequential charges. Andrew's wife, the anonymous investor, the woman he'd just seated with junior staff. The equations were simple, but their sum was devastating. Elena took the microphone Langford offered, waiting for the murmurs to die down. When she spoke, her voice carried the quiet authority of someone who'd earned the right to be heard. "Thank you, Mr. Langford." She scanned the crowd, her gaze passing over Andrew without stopping. "When I started investing 15 years ago, I learned quickly that the loudest voices in a room are rarely the ones worth listening to." A few nervous laughs. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is work in silence, until silence itself becomes the statement. She paused, letting the words settle. "I'm honored to join Langford Holdings' board, and I look forward to building on the foundation we've established. Thank you all for your trust." The applause started hesitantly, then built like a wave, strongest from the women in the room who recognized something revolutionary in the moment. Naomi was on her feet immediately, clapping with deliberate emphasis, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. At the head table, Andrew sat frozen, his colleagues' faces carefully neutral. No one met his eyes. The social calculus had shifted instantaneously. He'd gone from rising star to cautionary tale in the span of a revelation. Langford took the microphone back. "Ms. Reeves, Mrs. Carter, brings not just capital but vision to our organization. Her analysis of emerging markets in Southeast Asia directly influenced our merger strategy." He turned to her with genuine admiration. "We're lucky to have her." "Here, here," someone called, and the applause rippled again. Elena returned to her seat, not the distant one Andrew had assigned her, but a newly empty chair that materialized near Langford as staff quietly reconfigured the table. The message was clear. She belonged at the center now. Andrew remained at the head table, but the space around him felt different, contaminated by his miscalculation. He tried to catch Langford's eye, but the CEO was deep in conversation with Elena, their heads bent together over a tablet displaying financial projections. As dinner progressed, The social dynamics reassembled themselves around the new reality. People who'd ignored Elena now angled for her attention. The woman in Chanel who'd patronized her earlier approached with a rigid smile. "Mrs. Carter, I had no idea." "Of course not," Elena replied graciously. "That was rather the point." Across the table, Richard, who'd called her grounded with such condescension, looked like he'd swallowed glass. His wife kicked him under the table. Elena saw the flinch. Naomi appeared at Elena's elbow during the dessert course. "How does it feel?" Elena considered the question, watching Andrew attempt conversation with colleagues who kept finding reasons to look elsewhere. Like breathing for the first time in years. "The rumors are already starting. Twitter's exploding." "Let them talk." "Oh, they are." Naomi's smile was sharp. #silent partner is trending. Someone already made a meme of Andrew standing when Langford said sit down. Despite herself, Elena felt a smile tug at her lips. "I didn't plan for public humiliation." "Maybe not. But you planned for truth." Naomi squeezed her shoulder. "And truth has its own momentum." After dinner, as guests migrated to the terrace for cognac and cigars, Langford invited Elena to his private study. The room smelled of leather and old wood, walls lined with first editions and corporate memorabilia. "I have to admit," he said, pouring 2 glasses of rare bourbon, "I'm impressed by the long game you played." "It wasn't a game, Mr. Langford." "Victor, please. We're partners now." He handed her a glass. "How long have you been investing under your maiden name?" 12 years. Since before I met Andrew." "And he never knew?" Elena swirled her bourbon, watching it coat the glass. "He knew I had some investments. He assumed they were modest mutual funds, maybe a rental property. He never asked for details, and I never volunteered them." "Why reveal yourself now?" The question hung between them. Elena set down her glass with deliberate care. "Because I'm tired of being someone's accessory. And because this company deserves investors who are present, not shadows." Victor nodded slowly. "Your analysis of our structural vulnerabilities was brilliant. The board's been operating on your recommendations for months without knowing who you were. Ideas stand on their own merit. Names just get in the way." Spoken like someone who's had to prove herself twice as much for half the credit. He raised his glass. "To new partnerships and old wisdom." They clinked glasses just as the door burst open. Andrew stood in the doorway, tie loosened, face flushed with alcohol and rage.
"Anna,
"We need to talk."
now."
Langford's expression iced over. "Carter, you don't burst into private meetings." "This is my wife," Andrew spat, "who is also my business partner and a board member." Langford stood, his posture radiating authority. "And unless you want to add insubordination to tonight's growing list of concerns, I suggest you wait outside." Andrew's fists clenched, but he wasn't drunk enough to ignore direct orders from his CEO.
"Fine."
"Elena, when you're done here." He left without closing the door. Victor moved to shut it, then turned back to Elena with concern. "Are you safe? In your marriage, I mean." The question surprised her. "He's not violent, just diminished. Wounded egos can be dangerous." "So can silent ones," Elena replied. "I'll be fine." But as she left the study 20 minutes later, heading back toward the suite she still technically shared with her husband, she felt uncertainty for the first time that night. The revelation had been satisfying, but its aftermath waited ahead like a dark room she'd have to enter. Andrew was sitting on the balcony, another drink in hand, staring at the vineyard rows disappearing into darkness. He didn't turn when she entered. 14%, he said finally. "I looked it up on my phone. You own 14% of the company I work for." "Yes." "How long?" 3 years. He laughed, a bitter sound. 3 years. 3 years of you sitting there, playing the dutiful wife, while you what? Judged me? Pitted me? Elena sat down in the chair, opposite him. "Neither, Andrew. I loved you. She paused. "I wanted to believe we could be partners in everything. By lying. By protecting something I built before I knew you. By keeping one thing that was mine." Her voice remained calm, but hurt threaded through it. You never asked about my life before you. Not really. You never wanted to know where I came from or what I'd accomplished. You just wanted me to fit into your vision of what a wife should be. That's not. He stopped because it was true. Do you even know what I majored in at college? Silence. Do you know why I volunteer with scholarship programs? More silence. You don't know me, Andrew. You never wanted to. You wanted an accessory, not a partner. He turned finally, his eyes wet with tears or rage or both. You made me look like a fool. No, Elena said softly. You did that when you decided I wasn't enough as I was. She stood, walking to the bedroom door. I'm sleeping in the second bedroom tonight. Tomorrow, we can discuss next steps. But tonight, I just want silence. Behind her, Andrew's voice cracked. I didn't know you were capable of this. Elena paused at the threshold. That's the problem, Andrew. You never bothered to find out what I was capable of. She closed the door gently, leaving him alone with the darkness and the sound of wind through distant vines. Morning arrived harsh and bright through the suite's floor-to-ceiling windows. Elena woke in the second bedroom, her phone already buzzing with notifications. She scrolled through them with detached interest. 3 text messages from Naomi, 2 from her assistant, 1 from her lawyer, and 47 new emails. The news had spread faster than wildfire. Financial blogs were already running stories. Secret investor behind Langford merger revealed as CEO's wife. Housewife or hedge fund mastermind. Andrew Carter's wife makes him look small, literally. That last headline, from a gossip site, included a photo of Andrew standing prematurely at the dinner, hand raised in victory, while Langford told him to sit down. The image was already being turned into memes, shared across platforms with captions ranging from merely clever to devastatingly cruel. Elena set down her phone and moved to the window. Below, the vineyard was peaceful, morning mist burning off as the sun climbed. From the main bedroom, she heard Andrew moving around, the sound of drawers slamming, his phone ringing repeatedly and being ignored. She showered and dressed in casual elegance, cream linen pants and a silk blouse, then emerged to find Andrew in wrinkled clothes from the night before, staring at his laptop with hollow eyes. You've seen the coverage, he said flatly. Some of it. They're calling me a joke. A trophy husband who didn't know his wife was the one with real power. He looked up, his expression somewhere between wounded and accusing. How could you do this to me? Elena poured herself coffee from the suite's elaborate machine, taking time to craft her response. I didn't do this to you, Andrew. I revealed something I'd built independently, something I had every right to keep private until I chose otherwise. The humiliation you're feeling isn't caused by my success. It's caused by the expectations you built around my failure. That's bullshit psychology. Is it? She turned to face him fully. You introduced me to your colleagues as someone who wasn't into the corporate world. You seated me with junior staff at dinner. You publicly diminished my intelligence, my capability, my worth. And you did it so casually, so consistently, that you stopped even noticing. I was protecting you. From what? Respect? Recognition? Or were you protecting yourself from having to share space with someone who might overshadow you? The question landed like a slap. Andrew's face reddened. You're my wife. You're supposed to make me look good, not. I'm not your accessory, Elena interrupted, her voice still calm but harder now. I'm not a trophy or a prop or a supporting character in your story. I'm a person who built something real while you were busy taking credit for other people's work. What's that supposed to mean? Before Elena could respond, someone knocked on the suite door. Andrew moved to answer it, revealing Langford himself, dressed in casual weekend attire but wearing the expression of someone conducting business. Victor, Andrew said, trying to inject warmth into his voice. Come in, we were just... This isn't a social call, Carter. Langford's voice was crisp. We need to discuss several matters that have come to the board's attention. Elena set down her coffee. I'll give you privacy. Actually, Mrs. Carter, I'd prefer if you stayed. Some of this concerns you. Andrew's face went pale. Langford entered the suite, and Elena closed the door behind him. The CEO remained standing, creating a subtle power dynamic that made Andrew seem smaller in his own space. The accounting team, Langford began without preamble, flagged some irregularities in expense reports submitted under your name, Carter. Business class flights charged to the company that were actually personal trips. Hotel stays that didn't correspond with any business meetings. Restaurant bills for meals you claimed were client dinners, but couldn't produce any meeting records for. Andrew opened his mouth, closed it. Those were, I can explain. You expensed a trip to the Maldives last March, claiming it was for client relationship development. Which client? Silence. You submitted receipts for a $5,000 dinner at Per Se, supposedly entertaining potential investors. But according to your calendar, which syncs with the company system, you had no meetings scheduled that week. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd suspected Andrew was careless with money, but this was theft.
From her company.
Using her investment. How long has this been going on? She asked quietly. Langford's expression was grim. At least 2 years, based on the preliminary review. Potentially longer. We're conducting a full audit. Andrew found his voice finally. This is ridiculous. Those expenses were a legitimate business. Stop. Langford's command was sharp. Don't make this worse by lying. The evidence is documented. Receipts, credit card statements, calendar records that don't match your reported activities.
He paused.
You've been living above your salary for years, Carter. We all noticed, but assumed it was family money. Now we understand. You were stealing from the company your wife helped save. The irony was so devastating that even Langford seemed pained delivering it. Andrew slumped into a chair, his face gray. What happens now? Elena asked. Official investigation. Suspension pending results. If the full audit confirms what we found. Langford didn't need to finish the sentence. You can't fire me, Andrew said desperately. I've worked there for 8 years. I've brought in clients, closed deals. You've taken credit for other people's work, Langford corrected. Your so-called wins were team efforts you happen to be adjacent to. We've known this for a while, Carter. But the board tolerated it because you weren't actively harmful. His voice hardened. Fraud changes that calculation significantly. Elena moved to the window, needing distance from the scene. Below, guests were beginning to emerge for the morning's wine-tasting activities, laughing and relaxed, oblivious to the drama unfolding above them. Elena, Andrew's voice cracked. Say something. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. You own part of the company, you can. She turned, and whatever he saw on her face made him stop mid-sentence. I can't lie for you, Andrew. I won't. But I'm your husband. You're a man who stole from a company I invested in, who diminished me publicly while living off my success, who mocked my intelligence while using my money. Her voice remained steady, each word precisely placed. I'm sorry this happened, Andrew, but I won't compromise my integrity to protect you from the consequences of your choices. Langford nodded with what looked like respect. The board will meet tomorrow morning to review the findings. You'll receive formal notification of the investigation by email within the hour, Carter. I suggest you retain legal counsel. He moved toward the door, then paused. Mrs. Carter, we have a board orientation session at 11 if you're still available. I understand if you need time given the circumstances. I'll be there, Elena said firmly. After Langford left, the silence in the suite felt suffocating. Andrew sat motionless, staring at nothing. Elena gathered her things methodically, phone, tablet, her leather portfolio. Where are you going? Andrew's voice was barely a whisper.
To do my job.
To honor the commitments I made. She paused at the door. You should use this time to think about what you want to say to the investigators. The truth, Andrew. Not the version that makes you look better. I'll lose everything. Then you'll understand how I felt every time you made me smaller to make yourself bigger. She left him there, closing the door on more than just a room. The board orientation session convened in the Vineyard's private conference center, a modern glass structure overlooking the valley. 6 board members sat around an oval table, 4 men, 1 woman, and now Elena. The atmosphere was professional but charged with the electricity of recent events. Langford conducted the meeting with practiced efficiency, walking Elena through governance structures, quarterly review processes, and strategic priorities. She contributed thoughtfully, asking questions that revealed her deep understanding of the business. Your background in venture capital, one board member noted, suggests you'll be particularly valuable as we explore the tech sector expansion. I'd be happy to leverage those relationships, Elena agreed. Though I should note that any companies I have personal stakes in would need to be disclosed for conflict of interest purposes. Of course, we'll have legal draw up the appropriate documentation. As the meeting concluded, the lone other woman on the board, Margaret Chin, who'd served for 15 years, approached Elena with a warm smile. "That was masterful last night," Margaret said quietly. "I've been watching these men dance around their egos for decades. What you did, revealing yourself on your own terms, that takes courage." "Or desperation," Elena replied with a slight smile. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Margaret's expression grew more serious. "You'll face pushback. Some of these men won't like having their assumptions challenged. But you have allies here." "Thank you. That means more than you know." Outside, Naomi was waiting by the fountain, scrolling through her phone with an expression of grim amusement. "You've gone viral," she announced. "Well, Andrew has. There's a TikTok trend now, people recreating the sit-down, Carter moment with their own humiliations."
Elena winced.
"That's cruel. That's the internet. But there's another side too. Women sharing their own stories of being underestimated by partners, family, bosses. You've started something bigger than you realize." Naomi looked up from her phone. "How are you holding up?" "Honestly,
I don't know yet."
it's like I've been holding my breath for so long that actually breathing feels strange." They walked together through the vineyard's grounds, past guests who now watched Elena with new eyes, some curious, some admiring, some calculating. "The audit's going to be devastating for him," Naomi said. "You know that, right? This isn't just job loss. This is potential criminal charges." "I know. Any regrets?" Elena considered the question carefully. "Not about revealing who I am. That was overdue. But I didn't want to destroy him, Naomi. I just wanted to stop being invisible." Sometimes those are the same thing. When someone's built their identity on diminishing you, your visibility becomes their destruction. Back at the suite, Elena found Andrew exactly where she'd left him, though now surrounded by papers, printed emails, bank statements, credit card bills. He looked up as she entered, his eyes red-rimmed. "I've been going through everything," he said hoarsely, trying to document which expenses were legitimate business and which were personal. Elena set down her bag. "And it's worse than I thought. I got confused, Elena." The lines blurred. When you're trying to look successful, sometimes you convince yourself that looking the part is part of the job. That's not how it works, Andrew. I know that now. He rubbed his face with both hands. My lawyer says if I cooperate fully, show remorse, offer restitution, maybe I avoid criminal charges. Maybe. Elena moved to the kitchenette, putting on water for tea. The mundane action felt grounding. "How much?" she asked. "How much what? How much did you steal from the company? Total." The silence stretched long enough that she turned to look at him. His face had crumbled. "They're estimating around 200,000 over 2 years. Maybe more." The number hung in the air like smoke. $200,000. Money that came partly from her investment, from her intelligence and risk-taking. Money that funded his performance of success, while he mocked her simplicity. "I can pay it back," Andrew said quickly. "I have assets, investments." "Bought with what money?" He had no answer. Elena poured her tea with steady hands. "You need to face this on your own, Andrew. I won't bail you out. I won't use my connections to minimize the consequences. You made these choices. You'll accept what follows." "You're my wife," he said desperately. "Doesn't that mean anything?" She turned to face him fully, teacup warming her hands. "It meant everything, Andrew. That's why this hurts so much. I loved you. I believed we were building something together. But you were building a facade, and you needed me to be small enough to hide behind. I didn't, he stopped, because denial would be pointless now. I'm going to stay in town for the next few days to complete my board orientation, Elena continued. You should probably return to Boston. Handle your legal situation. We can discuss everything else when things are clearer. You mean divorce? The words sat between them like a gravestone. Elena didn't confirm or deny it, just sipped her tea. That evening, as sunset painted the valley in shades of amber and rose, a company dinner was scheduled, smaller than the previous night's gala, more intimate. Elena almost declined, wanting solitude to process everything, but Langford personally called to encourage her attendance. You're part of this team now, he said. And teams show up for each other. So she dressed in a simple navy dress and made her way to the private dining room. The atmosphere was notably different from the previous night. Quieter, more genuine. People approached her with real interest rather than social obligation. During the meal, Langford stood to make a toast. Last night was memorable for many reasons, he began, drawing a few nervous laughs. But what I want to acknowledge tonight is the principle it represents. This company succeeds when we recognize talent and intelligence regardless of how it's packaged. When we listen to quiet voices. When we value substance over performance. He raised his glass toward Elena. To new partnerships and old lessons finally learned. The table rose, glasses lifted. Elena stood as well, feeling the weight of the moment. As she raised her own glass, she caught her reflection in the window, the same woman she'd always been, but somehow different. Not because she'd changed, but because she'd finally stopped pretending she hadn't. After dinner, as guests dispersed into the evening, Elena found herself alone on the terrace where, just 24 hours earlier, she'd been called grounded, with such condescension. The memory felt distant now, like something that happened to someone else. Quite a difference a day makes. She turned to find Margaret Chin holding 2 glasses of port. The older woman offered one to Elena. I want to share something, Margaret said, settling into a nearby chair. 20 years ago, I was in a similar position, brilliant in my field, married to a man who loved the idea of me, but not the reality. He wanted a wife who made him look good at parties, not a partner who might outshine him in boardrooms. What did you do? I chose myself. Margaret smiled. Hardest and best decision of my life. The divorce was ugly. He tried to claim he'd supported my career, that he deserved part of my success. But the truth was documented. Every patent, every paper, every achievement had my name alone on it. He'd just been standing nearby, accepting congratulations. Do you regret it? Only that I didn't do it sooner. She sipped her port. You know what the real tragedy is? Not that they underestimate us. It's that we sometimes underestimate ourselves, make ourselves smaller to fit their expectations. The moment you stop doing that, that's when you become dangerous. Elena absorbed the words, feeling their truth settle into her bones. I spent so long being what he needed me to be that I almost forgot what I actually was. Almost, Margaret emphasized. But you didn't forget. And last night, you reminded every woman in that room, hell, every person in that room, that silence isn't the same as absence. That patience isn't the same as weakness. They sat together as darkness completed its takeover of the sky, 2 women who'd chosen themselves over the comfort of being chosen. Below them, the vineyard stretched into shadow, rows and rows of vines that had weathered seasons, storms, and harvests still standing. Later that night, back in her suite, Elena opened her laptop and began drafting an email. Not to lawyers or accountants, but to herself, a list of things she wanted, needed, and would no longer compromise on. At the top, she wrote, I will not make myself smaller for anyone's comfort ever again. Her phone buzzed with a text from Andrew. I'm taking the morning flight back to Boston.
I'm sorry, Elena.
For all of it. She stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back. I know you are. I'm sorry too. Because she was sorry that love hadn't been enough, that potential had curdled into resentment, that 2 people who'd once chosen each other had ended up here. But she wasn't sorry for choosing herself. Not anymore. As she prepared for bed, Elena caught her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The same face that had smiled through casual cruelties, that had lowered its eyes to avoid confrontation, that had stayed silent while being made small. Except now, looking back at herself, she saw something different in those eyes. Not anger, though that was there. Not triumph, though that was present too. What she saw was recognition, the kind that comes when you finally meet yourself after a long absence. When the performance ends and the person remains. "Ma'am," she said softly to her reflection, testing how the word felt in her own voice. Then, stronger. "Ma'am." It sounded like respect, like authority, like someone who'd earned the right to both. Outside her window, the California night was vast and full of stars. Tomorrow would bring board meetings, legal complexities, and decisions that would reshape her life. But tonight, Elena Carter stood in her own truth, finally visible to the person who needed to see her most. Herself. The morning would come soon enough, bringing with it all the consequences and complications of choosing authenticity over comfort. But for now, in this moment between revelation and resolution, Elena simply existed, no longer performing, no longer diminishing, no longer apologizing for taking up exactly as much space as she'd earned. The woman in the mirror smiled back at her. Not the practiced smile of a performance, but something real and hard won, and entirely her own. Class, she thought, really wasn't what you wore or where you sat or who acknowledged you. It was this. Standing in your truth even when the applause died down, even when the cameras stopped flashing, even when no one was watching but yourself. And in that moment, alone in a luxury suite overlooking vineyards she partially owned, Elena Carter finally felt classy enough. 6 months had transformed everything and nothing. Elena stood in her new corner office at Langford Holdings, the Boston skyline stretching before her like a promise kept. The space was understated, cream walls, minimalist furniture, a single orchid on her desk, but the view commanded respect. Her phone buzzed constantly with meeting requests, investment pitches, and interview inquiries. Since the vineyard revelation, she'd become something of a phenomenon. The silent investor, they called her in Forbes. Bloomberg had run a profile titled Elena Reeves, the woman who hid in plain sight. But the attention felt strange, like wearing someone else's clothes. She'd never wanted fame, only autonomy. The irony wasn't lost on her. By revealing herself, she'd lost the very privacy that had given her power. The Women's Initiative Fund is ready for board approval, Naomi announced, sweeping into the office with her usual kinetic energy. She dropped a thick proposal on Elena's desk. First scholarship goes out next month. We've named it the Reeves Foundation Fellowship. Elena opened the document, scanning the mission statement she'd written months ago, for those once told they weren't enough. The words still resonated, perhaps even more now. Many applications? 700 and counting. Every single one includes a story about being underestimated. Naomi's expression softened. You started something, Elena. Something that matters. Across town, in a modest studio apartment in Cambridge, Andrew Carter scrolled through the same articles that celebrated his ex-wife's ascension. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, surprisingly amicable given the circumstances. Elena had asked for nothing beyond the separation itself, though legally, she could have claimed far more. The criminal charges had been dropped after he'd made full restitution, sold his car and watch collection, and agreed to 5 years probation. But the professional damage was permanent. No firm would touch him. His LinkedIn profile generated sympathetic clicks, but 0 opportunities. He'd started giving interviews, carefully managed by a PR consultant he could barely afford, claiming he'd been humbled and learned about respect. Most people saw through it. Twitter certainly did. His mother had stopped calling after he'd refused to blame Elena publicly. She destroyed you, Claudia had hissed during their last conversation. The least you can do is. She didn't destroy me, Mother, Andrew had interrupted, his voice tired. I did that myself. They hadn't spoken since. Now, watching a video of Elena speaking at a women's leadership summit, poised, articulate, devastating in her quiet confidence, Andrew felt something he couldn't quite name. Not jealousy, though that was there. Not regret exactly, though that permeated everything. It was recognition, perhaps, of what he'd had and failed to see until it was illuminated by loss. Back at Langford Holdings, the board meeting convened at 2 o'clock sharp. Elena took her seat, not at the foot anymore, but mid-table, positioned between Margaret Chen and Victor Langford himself. First order of business, Victor announced, the Women's Initiative Fund proposal from Ms. Reeves. Elena stood, clicking through her presentation with practiced ease. She outlined the fund structure, selection criteria, and projected impact. When she finished, the room sat silent for a moment. One of the older board members, Gerald, who'd been skeptical of her from the start, cleared his throat. It's ambitious. Some might say overly so. The financial commitment is substantial. So was the investment that saved this company, Margaret interjected smoothly. I seem to recall Ms. Reeves taking a substantial risk there as well. The ROI on developing talent is generational, Elena added, her tone measured. We're not just funding education. We're investing in people who will reshape industries because they understand what it means to be overlooked. Victor nodded. I move to approve. All in favor. 7 hands rose. Gerald hesitated, then joined them. The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, as Elena gathered her materials, Victor approached with an unusual expression, something between pride and apology. I've been thinking about that first retreat, he said quietly. How your husband seated you with junior staff. How we all watched and said nothing. He paused. Complicity, through silence, is still complicity. You didn't know. That's not entirely true. I knew something was off. I sensed you were more than you appeared, but it was easier to accept the surface story than question it. His eyes met hers directly. I'm sorry for that, and grateful you gave us the chance to do better. Elena felt unexpected emotion tighten her throat. Thank you, Victor. That means more than you know. That evening, Elena met Naomi for dinner at their favorite restaurant, a small Italian place that knew them well enough to save their corner table. Over wine and pasta, they reviewed the day's victories. You've built something remarkable, Naomi said, raising her glass. 6 months ago, you were invisible by choice. Now you're reshaping corporate culture. Sometimes I miss the invisibility, Elena admitted. The quiet. Being able to move through the world without people watching, judging, projecting their narratives onto me. That's the price of authenticity. Once you're visible, you're visible. Naomi studied her friend's face. Any regrets? Only that I didn't do it sooner.
Elena smiled.
And that it cost Andrew everything. He cost himself everything. You just stopped subsidizing his delusions. I know. But knowing doesn't make it hurt less. They ate in comfortable silence for a moment before Naomi asked the question she'd been holding. Have you talked to him? Since the divorce?
No.
What would I say? Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Naomi shrugged. Closure isn't always about words. 2 weeks later, Elena received an unexpected call. Her assistant's voice carried uncertainty. There's a Andrew Carter here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says. Send him in. Elena stood as Andrew entered, and the change shocked her. He'd lost weight, his expensive suit replaced by off-the-rack business casual. But it was his eyes that struck her most, the arrogance replaced by something quieter, sadder, more real. I won't take much of your time, he said, remaining near the door. I just wanted to say something I should have said a long time ago. Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. He sat, hands folded in his lap like a student in the principal's office. I was wrong, Andrew said simply. Not just about the money, though that was unconscionable.
I was wrong about you.
About us. About what mattered. He looked around the office, taking in the understated elegance. This suits you. This life you've built. It's who you always were, and I was too insecure to see it. Andrew. Please let me finish. His voice cracked slightly. I've been in therapy. Court-mandated initially, but I've kept going. And I'm starting to understand that I didn't just underestimate you, I needed to. Because if I acknowledged how capable you were, how intelligent, how fundamentally better at navigating the world, then I'd have to face my own mediocrity. The honesty was startling. Elena sat back, studying the man she'd married, wondering if she'd ever really known him. I don't expect forgiveness, Andrew continued. I don't even deserve your time. But I wanted you to know that I'm genuinely sorry. Not for getting caught, for who I was when I thought no one was watching. Elena took a long breath. I appreciate you coming here, and I believe you're sorry. But Andrew, she paused, choosing words carefully. Sorry doesn't rebuild what was broken. It's a starting point for your healing, not an ending point for my pain. I understand. I hope you find peace. I hope you become whoever you're meant to be when you stop performing. She softened slightly. The man I married was in there somewhere beneath the insecurity. Maybe therapy will help you find him. Andrew stood, recognizing dismissal without it being cruel. At the door, he turned back. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you. What you've built, what you're doing with the fund. You're changing lives. Thank you. After he left, Elena sat alone in her office as dusk painted the sky in shades of purple and gold. The conversation had brought unexpected closure, not the dramatic confrontation she'd sometimes imagined, but something quieter and perhaps more meaningful. They'd both been performing different roles in a marriage neither fully understood. Now, at least they could each be authentic, even if it meant being authentic apart. 3 months later, Elena received an invitation she'd been half expecting, Langford Holdings' annual gala, the same event where, 1 year ago, she'd worked behind the scenes while Andrew took credit. This time, she was the keynote speaker. The irony was exquisite. Naomi helped her prepare, the two of them in Elena's apartment reviewing talking points and potential questions. Elena had moved after the divorce, a penthouse in Back Bay with floor-to-ceiling windows and space that finally felt like hers. Nervous? Naomi asked. Terrified, Elena admitted. Public speaking was never my strength. I preferred the shadows. Then speak from them. Tell the truth about what it means to build power quietly. Naomi smiled. You're not performing anymore, remember? Just being yourself is enough. The gala was magnificent. The same venue, the same elegant crowd, but Elena's position in it had fundamentally shifted. She arrived alone, wearing a midnight blue gown that whispered rather than shouted, and immediately drew attention. Cameras flashed. People approached with genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Ms. Reeves, a young woman in her 20s, intercepted Elena near the entrance. I'm sorry to ambush you, but I have to tell you, I'm a Reeves Fellow. Your fund changed my life. Elena stopped, giving the woman her full attention. Tell me about yourself.
I'm Maria Santos.
First-generation college student, business major. I was working 3 jobs to stay in school when I got your scholarship. Maria's eyes shimmered. But more than the money, though God knows that mattered, it was the message. That being underestimated isn't the end of the story. They talked for 10 minutes, Elena learning about Maria's startup plans and ambitions. By the time they parted, Elena felt steadier, reminded of why visibility mattered even when it felt uncomfortable. During cocktail hour, she noticed familiar faces from last year's event. Richard, who'd called her grounded, now approached with careful respect. Ms. Reeves, I wanted to apologize for. Last year, Elena finished. I remember. He flushed. I was thoughtless. Cruel, honestly. I'd like to make amends if possible. Elena considered him, his discomfort genuine, his contrition seemingly real. Amends aren't made in words, Richard. They're made in patterns. Treat the next grounded person you meet with respect, and we'll call it even. When dinner was announced, Elena found herself at the head table, the symbolic center of power she'd once observed from the periphery. Victor was on her right, Margaret on her left, and the conversations flowed naturally about markets, strategies, and innovations. As dessert arrived, Victor stood to introduce her. Last year, someone very important to this company worked tirelessly behind the scenes on this event. She organized, strategized, and made everything possible while others, myself included, took credit. He paused, letting the memory settle. Tonight, Elena Reeves stands before you not behind the scenes, but as the leading voice shaping our future. The applause was warm and sustained. Elena rose, moving to the podium with her notes, though she'd already decided to speak from something deeper than preparation. Thank you, Victor. And thank you all for being here. She gripped the podium, steadying herself. A year ago, I stood in this same room feeling invisible. Not because I was absent, but because invisibility felt safer than being seen and judged as insufficient. She scanned the crowd, finding faces that had dismissed her, ignored her, or simply looked through her as if she were decorative background. I built a career, a substantial one, while hiding behind my maiden name. Not because I was ashamed, but because I learned early that competence in a woman is sometimes threatening, especially when it exceeds expectations. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the female attendees. But invisibility has costs. When we make ourselves small to protect others' egos, we don't just diminish ourselves, we reinforce systems that require our diminishment. We teach people that our talents are conditional, that our intelligence should come with apologies attached. Elena's voice grew stronger, more assured. The Reeves Foundation Fellowship exists because I know what it means to be underestimated. To sit at tables where people assume you're decorative rather than decisive. To have your ideas repeated by someone louder and suddenly deemed brilliant. To be called grounded, like it's an insult rather than a statement about character. Uncomfortable shifting from some of the men in the room. Vigorous nodding from most of the women. But here's what I've learned. Being underestimated is temporary. What we build while people aren't paying attention, that's permanent. Every time someone dismissed me, I was learning, growing, investing, creating. Their lack of attention became my advantage. She paused, letting silence do its work. So to anyone here who feels unseen in this room or in life, I want you to know that invisibility can be a strategy, but it shouldn't be a sentence. When you're ready, when the time is right, step into your light. Not because you need validation, but because the world needs what you've built in the shadows. The standing ovation started with Maria Santos and spread like wildfire. Elena saw tears on faces throughout the room, recognition of shared experiences finally spoken aloud. After her speech, people swarmed her with questions, compliments, and their own stories. Elena listened to each one, understanding now that visibility wasn't about ego, it was about permission. By stepping forward, she'd given others permission to do the same. Late in the evening, as the crowd thinned, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of her vision. Claudia Carter, Andrew's mother, standing alone near the exit.
Elena aproched, curiosity overcoming caution.
Claudia. The older woman turned, her usual hauteur notably absent.
Elena.
She struggled visibly with words. I came tonight because I needed to see it for myself. What my son lost. What I failed to recognize. You don't need to. Yes, I do. Claudia's voice was firm despite its tremor. I raised Andrew to value appearance over substance. To see marriage as social currency rather than partnership. And in doing so, I taught him to destroy the best thing in his life.
She paused.
You were never the problem. We were. Elena felt unexpected compassion for this woman who tormented her with casual cruelty. We all perform roles we think we're supposed to play. Sometimes it takes losing everything to realize the script was wrong. He's working at a small nonprofit now, Claudia said quietly. Financial education for low-income students. The pay is nothing, but he seems lighter somehow. Like he's finally stopped pretending. I'm glad, Elena said and meant it. Claudia nodded, blinking back tears. I misjudged you, Elena. I looked down for so long that I forgot to look forward. Thank you for, she gestured vaguely at the room, for showing me what I was too blind to see. They parted without embracing, but something had shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but a mutual recognition that they'd both survived a system designed to pit them against each other. As Elena finally left the gala near midnight, exhausted but strangely fulfilled, she found Naomi waiting by the car. You killed it, Naomi said simply. I survived it, Elena corrected. There's a difference. Is there? They drove through Boston's nighttime streets, the city alive with possibility and secrets. Elena watched the lights blur past, thinking about all the invisible women building empires in the margins, all the quiet power accumulating in the shadows. I want to do more, Elena said suddenly. The fund is just the start. I want to create mentorship programs, investment networks, systems that amplify quiet voices instead of rewarding loud ones. Naomi smiled. Now you're thinking like someone who knows her power.
No, Elena corrected.
I'm thinking like someone who finally stopped apologizing for it. 9 months after the revelation, Elena sat in the Langford Holdings executive conference room watching Victor Langford sign his retirement papers. At 62, he was stepping back to focus on philanthropy and family, leaving the company in capable hands. It's official, Victor announced, setting down his pen. Effective next quarter, Margaret Chin assumes the role of CEO, with Elena Reeves as Chief Strategy Officer. Applause filled the room, but Elena noticed one absence. Gerald, the skeptical board member, had resigned the previous month, unable to adapt to what he called the company's new direction. His departure had been quiet, almost ashamed, as if he recognized his irrelevance. After the meeting, Victor asked Elena to walk with him through the building one last time. They moved through corridors she'd once visited as Andrew's invisible wife, now commanding respect with every step. I've been thinking about legacy, Victor said as they reached his office. What we leave behind when titles fade. I built this company, but you're transforming it into something better, somewhere talent matters more than performance. You gave me the platform, Elena countered.
No.
You built the platform yourself. I just finally stepped aside and let people see it. He smiled. That's the difference between leadership and ego. Leaders make space for others' growth. Ego demands they shrink to make us look bigger. He handed her a small box. Inside was a key, antique, brass, purely symbolic. My father gave me this when I started the company. He said it represented potential. Every lock you haven't tried yet, every door you haven't opened. I want you to have it. Elena felt emotion catch in her throat. Victor, I can't. You can. You will. And 20 years from now, you'll give it to someone else who needs permission to unlock their power. They embraced, and Elena understood this was more than a retirement. It was a passing of something essential, a recognition that institutions survive only when they evolve. That evening, Elena attended a scholarship ceremony for the first cohort of Reeves Fellows. 20 students stood on stage, each one holding a certificate and a check that would change their educational trajectory. When Maria Santos stepped to the microphone to represent the fellows, her voice carried the weight of collective gratitude. Ms. Reeves told us that being underestimated is temporary. She taught us that what we build while people aren't watching becomes permanent. We're standing here because she stepped into her light and showed us ours. The families in attendance, parents who'd worked multiple jobs, grandparents who'd sacrificed for education, wept openly. Elena understood then that her revelation hadn't just been personal. It had rippled outward, touching lives she'd never meet, inspiring changes she'd never witnessed directly. After the ceremony, a reporter from the Boston Globe approached. Ms. Reeves, there's a rumor that your ex-husband applied to work at the Reeves Foundation.
Can you comment? Elena posed, genuinely surprised.
Andrew applied? Our sources say he submitted an application for a financial education coordinator position. Given your history, people are wondering. If he's qualified and genuinely committed to the work, Elena interrupted carefully, then his application will be considered like anyone else's. Past mistakes don't disqualify people from future growth. That's the entire point of what we're building. The answer went viral overnight. Social media divided sharply. Some called it gracious, others called it naive, many called it revolutionary. 3 days later, Elena sat across from Andrew in a coffee shop in Cambridge. Not her office, neutral ground felt important. He looked different again, softer somehow, like a sculpture with the harsh edges worn away. I didn't apply to manipulate you, he said immediately. I applied because I've spent the last year learning about financial literacy programs, and I understand now, really understand, what it means when people are excluded from economic knowledge. Why this work? Because I was that person. Andrew's voice was steady, but vulnerable. I had access to money, but no real understanding of it. I performed wealth without comprehending value. And it destroyed me. He paused. I can't undo what I did, Elena. But maybe I can help others avoid the same mistakes. Elena studied him, looking for performance and finding only exhaustion and something resembling humility. If I recommend hiring you, and that's a significant if, you be working with young people who've been told they're not enough.
Can you handle that?
Truly listen to them without making it about your redemption? Yes. Can you work in a system I created, taking direction from people I've empowered, without resentment? Yes. Can you do this work if I'm never in the room, never acknowledge it, never give you the validation you once craved? Andrew met her eyes. That's the only way I can do it, Elena. If this becomes about us, I've already failed. She considered, weighing genuine growth against justified skepticism. Finally, I'll pass your application to the hiring committee with a note that you're not automatically disqualified. But Andrew, if you're hired, it's because you earned it. Not because of our history, but in spite of it. I understand. Thank you. As she left, Elena felt something release. Not forgiveness exactly, but the recognition that people could grow beyond their worst moments. She'd built her empire in the shadows. Perhaps Andrew could rebuild his character there too. 1 year after the Vineyard revelation, Elena stood before a mirror in her apartment, preparing for another gala. But this time felt different, not a performance or a test, just work she'd grown comfortable inhabiting. The Reeves Foundation had expanded beyond scholarships to include a venture capital fund specifically for women-led startups. The portfolio already included 3 companies founded by former fellows, each addressing gaps in markets that male-dominated firms had overlooked. Naomi appeared in the doorway, holding 2 glasses of champagne. To 1 year of being visible. They clinked glasses, and Elena studied her reflection. Same face, but different eyes, clearer somehow, unburdened by the constant calculation of making herself smaller. Any regrets? Naomi asked, echoing her question from a year ago.
None.
Well, one. I wish I'd done it sooner.
Elena smiled.
But maybe I needed those years in the shadows. Maybe you can't appreciate light without understanding darkness. Her phone buzzed with a message from Victor. The board voted unanimously. The initiative to require gender diversity in all investment committees passes. Your legacy is cemented. Elena showed Naomi, who hooped. You're literally changing how business operates. We are, Elena corrected. This was never individual achievement. It was collective awakening. At the gala that evening, a fundraiser for educational initiatives, Elena moved through the crowd with natural confidence. She stopped to help a waiter who dropped a tray, kneeling in her expensive gown to gather scattered canapes. I'm so sorry, ma'am, the young man stammered. Accidents happen, Elena said warmly, handing him the tray. Take a breath. You're doing great. An intern watching the exchange later posted about it. Watched Elena Reeves help our waiter with genuine kindness. That's class. That's power that doesn't need to prove itself. The tweet went viral, spawning a larger conversation about authentic leadership versus performative excellence. During her speech that evening, Elena shared something she'd never discussed publicly. People ask if I regret staying invisible so long. But invisibility taught me what matters. When no one's watching, you learn who you actually are versus who you think you should be. When there's no applause, you discover what work satisfies you intrinsically. She scanned the crowd, finding faces young and old, powerful and aspiring. True class isn't about impressing people. It's about consistency between your public face and private actions. It's about treating the waiter with the same respect as the CEO. It's about building things that matter even when no one knows you built them. Later, as the event concluded, a young woman approached, college-aged, nervous, holding a worn notebook. Ms. Reeves, I'm sorry to bother you, but I wanted to ask, how did you stay calm when they laughed at you? When they dismissed you? Elena recognized the question's real meaning. How do I survive my own invisibility? I stayed calm, Elena said gently, because I knew they'd stop laughing when they started listening. And the beautiful thing about patient work is that it speaks louder than any defense you could offer. She touched the young woman's notebook.
Keep building.
They'll notice eventually. And if they don't, you'll have built something remarkable anyway. The young woman's eyes filled with tears of recognition. Elena hugged her, understanding that these moments of passing strength forward, was the real legacy. As midnight approached and guests departed, Elena found herself alone on the venue's terrace, looking out at Boston's skyline. 1 year ago, she'd been invisible by design.
Now she was visible by choice.
The difference was everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Watching your speech from my apartment. You were right, I'm lighter now. Thank you for teaching me that. Andrew. She didn't respond, but she didn't delete it either. Some messages were meant to be received, not answered. Naomi joined her on the terrace, two tired women who'd built something real together. What are you thinking? Naomi asked. That a year ago, someone told me I wasn't classy enough for his circle.
Elena smiled.
Now the circle answers to me. And the funny thing is, I don't need them to answer to me. I just need to be myself. And let that be enough. Is it enough? Elena considered the question. Really considered it. Was this life, this visibility, this constant negotiation between privacy and platform, enough? Yes, she said finally. Not because it's perfect, but because it's real. I'm not performing anymore. I'm just being. And being myself turns out to be exactly enough. They stood together in comfortable silence as the city breathed below them, millions of people performing and surviving and occasionally, beautifully, just being themselves. Elena thought about all the invisible people building power in shadows, all the quiet voices waiting for their moment to speak. She hoped they'd find it. She hoped they'd know, as she finally knew, that their silence wasn't absence, it was preparation. That patience wasn't weakness, it was strategy. That making yourself small for others' comfort was a temporary condition, not a permanent sentence. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of possibility and rain. Elena closed her eyes, feeling the moment settle into memory. 1 year ago, she'd been revealed. Tonight, she was simply present. And that, she understood finally, was true class. Not in how others saw you, but in how you saw yourself. Not in external validation, but in internal certainty. Not in applause or recognition or titles, but in the quiet knowledge that you'd built something real, something lasting, something true. Ready to go? Naomi asked. Elena opened her eyes, took one last look at the city spread before her like a tapestry of light and shadow, and smiled.
Yes.
I'm ready. They walked toward the exit together, two women who'd chosen themselves over comfort, truth over performance, authenticity over applause. Behind them, the party's remnants were being cleared away, another event ending, another chapter closing. But ahead, through the doors and into the night, an entire world waited. Not the world that had once dismissed Elena Carter as insufficient, but a world she'd helped reshape simply by refusing to stay small. She stepped through the doors into the cool night air, no longer invisible, no longer performing, no longer apologizing for taking up exactly as much space as she'd earned. Just Elena. Finally, completely, powerfully, just herself. And that, she knew with bone-deep certainty, was classy enough. If someone spent years making you feel small to make themselves feel big, would you have the strength to reveal the truth, even knowing it might destroy them? Hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more tales about hidden power, quiet revenge, and the moment silence finally speaks.